This is Sunday, May the 6th, and it's a seminar listening to some very interesting information from Jack in Venus.
Addiction. I'm only going to give you my interpretation of addiction. I would say any human being brought up under a condition of particular sounds, they do not remember most sounds unless they're related to something. If a bird makes a particular sound and they eat that bird and it tastes good to them, their value system, then they listen for that bird more than any other bird because it reinforces them. Is that clear so far? Addiction is anything that you tend to repeat. And if you hear a word taboo, which means forbidden, you might get hurt or killed or die if you enter a certain place. So that word may cause people to stay away from certain things. They could be addicted to stay away from certain things. Do you understand that? Automatically they stay away and pull their children away if they're addicted or conditioned to certain habits. So if you find yourself, I don't know if you ever did, singing commercials, chew more tobacco, it's good for you. If you hear it often enough, you will sing it, and you don't even know you're singing it. Music is also addictive, especially if you hold a radio against your ear walking down the street all the time. You're building an associative system that tends to repeat itself. How do you fight addiction? First of all, I wanted you to know that addiction could be anything. It could be addicted to smelling flowers. If you see flowers, you can't help but sniff. That could be an addiction if you do it often enough. If the association becomes often enough or frequently used, I would say the person automatically don't even know they're addicted, but they sniff. If they've been doing it often enough. There are men who smell flowers once a year, so they're not addicted to lean forward and smell it. That's why we sing commercials, or we say a stitch in time saves 9. Grandmothers repeat that over and over again. They may be addicted to a slogan or words, but they're not addicted in the same sense as having done it over 400 times. So they say 2 and 2 is 4 all day long because they have limited associations. That's almost the same. A long period of time of repeating something is not unlike an addiction. You almost have to repeat it. Get out of the house, it's burning. That's strong conviction because they know that the house will kill you if you don't get out. So you're addicted to yell fire when the house is on fire to get the people out. But if you don't care about people, you just watch the fire. But it depends on how often and whether people you like have been hurt by the fire. So you lock on to things with different degrees of intensity, depending on your connection. If your child were burned in a fire, you lost, say, a child. Then the word fire has a different meaning than the average person. So what you're addicted to depends on your associations with it. Now, how do you change addiction? First way to change it is not to become that addicted to anything, meaning don't keep listening to music. If you do, you're going to be humming it whether you like it or not. Or you'll be making any noise that's associated with pleasantry to you. There are people that buy the songs of songbirds. I find birds very annoying because they don't sing long enough. They just make over and over again and no variations on it. So I find it painful. But a lot of people love the sound of birds singing. They're not singing, they make certain sounds. Why do we say they're singing? Because to us, it might sound like singing. But they're very painful to me. Rather than painful when a lion or a tiger roars, I leave the area. If there's something I hear in the woods like that, I leave the area by association. I don't know whether to leave or not unless my encounters with it have been unpleasant. How you break addiction again. Long-term addiction where the body is automatically responding to it, or you feel you can't live without it, or you feel you can't live without a certain person. There are people that take their lives when their wife or best friend dies because they can't live without them. That's becoming addicted to a person. if you can't live without the person. The more friends you have, the easier it is to live without a certain person. But if you live with one person all your life, you never go anywhere, and they're killed or missing or kidnapped, then you live in pain. But if you have many associations, many people that you know that you like, that are pleasant, you're less apt to become that addicted to any one person. So to avoid addiction, avoid super dependency. And also, if all your problems are solved, if you got a mother that puts your shoes on in the morning and feeds you with a plate, with a spoon, until you're 7 years old or 10 years old, you become addicted. You take a book and you read it and you open your mouth when your mother brings the food over. You become addicted to that performance. And it's very difficult for you to break that if it occurred over a long period of time. So in order to break addiction, don't go getting involved in repetition too long a period of time. Now, if a person is already addicted, you have to expose them to other things so that the other things become more important to them. If it's religion, it'll undo it if they're addicted to it. And so the more things you're exposed to, the less probable your addiction. Also, the less you're exposed to. You understand that? It's easier. But if it's long-term, it's harder. Because the associative system is almost like uncontrollable urge to do something. So what I say about addiction is try to avoid repetition of words that have very little meaning, and try to avoid repetition of unhealthy dependency. Do you know what that means? If you smoke cigars and you're in an environment where everybody smokes cigars, it's very hard to break that habit. But when you first get there, you just say, I'm addicted. I become hurt physically. I cough. You have to give them a reason for walking out, otherwise they resent you walking out. Just say, I have an allergy against that. Instead of saying, hey, I don't like you guys smoking. That's an attack. That's received as an attack. So it depends on how you put it. Again, I'll repeat, in order to avoid addiction, stay away from long continued practice and exposure to any one system. Now, there are useful addictions. Taking a deep breath every morning when you get up and stretching, that's a useful addiction. It doesn't hurt you. It does you good. So you can be addicted to useful things. Like if somebody throws something at you, you go like that. If you get good at it, you can avoid being hit. So that's a useful type of training or avoidance. Addiction is non-avoidance. When you become addicted, you're less able to avoid. It's hard for a person not to listen to music when he hears it, if you're addicted to it. Like I might turn it off because I don't want to be addicted to it. As a kid, I found myself singing television commercials. Now what the hell am I singing television? Any human being tends to repeat any sound system that's repeated over again. Whether it's commercial or whether it's a song or whether it's a proverb or anything else. So if you get in the habit of trying to change people by short quotations, like a stitch in time saves 9, a bird in the hand is worth 10 in the bush. If you get used to that, you stop thinking. But you can use it if you use it once a year or every 3 months. That's no addiction.
How can we as individuals select what is an addiction?
You ask yourself, what use is that? Suppose I were to tell you that the banks control America and that the government is only interested in American interest. Now, if you have an investment in this country that's important to you, if you give up that investment freely, which is highly improbable, you become addicted to the institutions. And if I say to you, let's share resources with the world, you say, no, I've got all the resources I want right now. I don't want to share it with the world. Okay, I can understand that. But if you could do this, if you can convince people that they'd be better off 5 years from now or 8 years from now, they might be able to do that. But the probability is very low unless you have a pitch. Like, I think within the next 4 months, you will see results. That's also good. Where you say, oh, that's 40 years from now. You'll be able to get anything you want. Well, most people say, oh, look, right now I got a car, a cabin cruiser, a beautiful wife, and 3 kids. Why should they surrender that unless it's falling apart and they could see it? If they even are living in a house and they can see riots occurring in America, it may take that degree where riots occurring and marching people and the police being shot and the thing falling apart, and your home is not that secure anymore. If you can convince people that the way things are going, they will lose what they've got. And that's hard to do unless those conditions are occurring. And if they occur too late, you may not be able to change them. Meaning, if it takes a roof caving in on a guy before he says, I'm getting out, that would be heavily invested in an established point of view. So the way you deal with that is say, what is this doing for me, and what will its end result be? And try to think it out as best you can, and then make a decision. The decision you make will be forced upon everything you know. It has nothing to do with rational. Your decisions are based on what you've been exposed to. So to avoid certain addictions, try to find out how you might benefit by another system, or will you be hung if the other system comes in. In other words, the leaders of many countries today, if they give up, they'll be judged, put in jail, and maybe assassinated. So they're not about to give up their position. If they fear the people that are rioting against them will kill them anyway, they might as well take them all down with them. You know what I mean?
Would you talk about a little, because I think it relates to this, where you said every time you recite a hymn or you say the Pledge of Allegiance, even though it's repetition, you still burn a new pathway.
Yes. Yes, that's true. When you sing a song, it isn't the same old pathway, it's a new one, referring to the old one. Whenever you say, how are you, ma'am, you remember you said to Mrs. Josephine. When you say, hi, ma'am, again, it might be Mrs. Bernstein. Do you know what I mean? Some other person. So it's a different association with the same words. Now, you can't go ahead and invent all your own words for everybody, because then you won't be able to talk to people anymore. They won't know what you're talking about. So you have to communicate, and you must use language as it's conventionally used, even though it doesn't mean anything. You have to do that until you turn them around. After you turn them around, you can use a special language with that person. You can take language and do what you want with it. That's how you work telepathy. Most instances, it's the same sort of thing. So you can work out 1,000 telepathic schemes if you know how to do it. I told you can take this cup and put it at about 4 o'clock in relation to a top view. 4 o'clock means Kennedy, and 6 o'clock is about here, you know. So 6 o'clock means President Johnson. Would you like some chocolate? That means Kennedy. You can make all kinds of things. And the average person tends to listen to the language as used.
Would you say when you're amongst people for a long time, and wouldn't you feel that form of communication would be a good addiction to have because it shortens up you don't really need to carry out so many words if you have that connection with somebody?
As long as you understand what you're doing, as long as you understand what's going on.
Yeah.
But if you think that's the right way, that's the truth, there's no such thing. It's just the way it's established for you. But when you start locking on that that's the truth or the only way, I would say the only way you can avoid war is by sharing the Earth's resources. I can't imagine any other way, unless somebody came down the clouds and said no more war. But I can't imagine any other way. That's all I'm saying. So when I say if we share the Earth's resource with everybody, and if we can find a way to do that, to convince everybody, they will join you. But if they're skeptical of you, they won't join you. So I figured most people will not join. All it takes is 3 or 4 nations to join, and they'll become such a powerful leverage. I think others will follow.
What are some tools to not attack people, but if they're on prescription drugs or they drink Mountain Dew or they have their own addictions, or even metaphysics, people that count on going to church every Sunday, what are some approaches without attacking them to let them understand, hey, it is an addiction that I have?
Yeah. Well, I would say, are you interested in other points of view other than your own? Not at all. I'm a Seventh-day Adventist and that's it. Get off. Because you can do it, but it's not worth it. And if a person says, Well, I believe in this particular Madame Blavatsky. You know who I'm talking about? She had a lot of views on metaphysics. And you say, are you interested in only Madame Blavatsky? No, I'm interested in many ideas. How about ideas that differ considerably from the way you think? Well, I'll try to understand them. That's good if you get anything like that. But if you get, no, Madame Blavatsky came directly from divine inspiration. If they come back very hardwired, get off. But if they say, I'd like to listen to other ideas, but when they listen to you, remember they're listening with their training of Madame Blavatsky. They can only hear it that way. And if you can interpret it different ways, the guy says, I never thought of that. That's an interesting point. That means you broke the bond. If a person says, let me think about it, then they come back, well, what about free will, And if you try to take away free will, remember, it's taking away the identity of the person. They lose their identity. Because after all, you are the person making the choices. And if you take that away from people without replacing it with something, like I said before, in criticizing a government or criticizing a police department, if you have no control over that, you can't do anything about it, leave it alone until you build enough of following to affect control. And if you can't, I think Alcoholics Anonymous have a saying, something about God give me the power to accept the things I cannot change, and change the things I can. Well, your ability to change things will grow. So when you say give me the power to change the things I can, that's now. But tomorrow you might be able to change a lot of things, might be getting better tools. And if your tools aren't any better, you can call people dumb, or you can get mad at people, or say, I need new tools. That's harder to do, okay? See if you can think of other things. Now, there's other types of addiction. Chemical addiction is very different. If you're into narcotics long enough, if you smoke long enough to change the body chemistry so it needs that sensation of marijuana, whatever you smoke, that's an addiction if you're on it long enough. I know somebody slipped something to me, LSD once, inside a date. They couldn't give it me direct. They put a date in my mouth, and then I felt this coming over me and I went to sleep, and it did not affect me at all. Maybe it was just only because they slipped one on me. But had they slipped a great number under different circumstances, I don't know what would have happened. I might have tried to open the window and fly. I don't know. I can't say certain things about myself. That's why when people say to me, Jock, what do you really like? I say, you ask Roxanne, then you ask Joe, and you ask Vinny, and you ask Mike, and you'll get a different picture, So I can't tell you what I'm like. You can only observe what I do to the extent that you're able to. And what I do, you can say, why did you do that? Doesn't seem like you. If I went out and started beating up kids for no reason at all, you say, I noticed you went out and you beat up this kid. I said, that kid gave me a hot foot before you came into the picture. He put a match on my shoe and lit it. But if you don't check it out to make sure you don't project, he's a child beater, give a person a chance to explain that way. And if you don't accept that explanation, you have to wait until they do other things that are contradictory. Now, people will contradict themselves many times because they're in many different situations, and we don't always understand the reason for a certain person's reaction. When I saw these girls squeeze the caterpillar and eat it, when everybody was doing it, I felt there might be something wrong, or I might be projecting a terrible taste of that caterpillar. So I tried it. I told you it tastes like eclair. But that caterpillar only lived on sweets. That would disgust you. But what really disgusts you is it's your interpretation of the event. It's very hard not to project. It's not easy. It's almost an automatic process. Any other questions about addiction? Chemical addiction is much more difficult because it alters the body's decision-making systems and also alters your feelings without something, without a drug or something that you need. Or you need encouragement, not from anybody, but a person you respect. If you get encouragement from the principal of your school, you're doing a very good job, that may be all right. But if you get encouragement from some person that you don't even respect at all, it doesn't work. So it's your attitude, that edits everything that happens, unfortunately. We've all been pre-edited. Do you know what that means? Unfortunately. It's very hard to sit back and be objective, clear your mind of your background. Very difficult to do. So if I behave in a way that where you see me beating a snake or something, say, why are you beating that snake? Oh, the snake caught fire and I was trying to put out the fire. You know, whatever it is. But hear the other person out before you accuse them of anything. It's very hard to be that objective. I would say what they call a loner. You know, people like that are loners, that don't associate with many people. They make their own reinforcements. It's called ego, or it's called, for that person, it's sustainability. They make their own ego. They say, God put me here to help the world. That makes them feel good. When you say, God didn't put you here, Satan put you here to make trouble in the world. Well, they're going to beat you up. That would be a reaction to those words that you're dealing with. So when you people find out that people react strongly to certain words, say, how do you interpret those words? You want to ask them. Well, that's terrible, you don't believe in God. Everybody believes in God. You got to believe in something. There are people like that. You must allow for that. If you're surprised by what people say, it means you have fixed allowances. You fix what you think people react to. The best thing to do is check it out. It's so much easier. Say, why did you piss on the cat? Because that cat walked up to me while I was pissing. I did not piss on the cat. You know, whatever it is, you have to hear them out. Otherwise you have to project. He's a cat pisser. It's very, very difficult to be objective, really. And it's very difficult to write about yourself. Like if I write an autobiography, as far as I know, I will only write about what occurred. I walked into the building and there was Albert Einstein sitting there and he said, what can I do for you? How can I help you? I would report that. But I will not report my reactions of being surprised by his sitting in a kimono, you know, because you have no business supposing what he'll be sitting in. But you should ask him so you don't go filling in nonsense. I give you extreme examples to avoid. Nothing is that extreme, as I put it. So no one could write about themselves. They say, I'm pretty fair-minded and open-minded. Nobody can be open-minded. It would mean you're brought up without any kind of value system. So you have to take people with a fixed set, which they always have. In order to survive, you have to have attitudes. To go to work, to earn a living is the right way to do it. That's fixed attitude. But a person that has an accommodating attitude, to accommodate anything that suits them, to hell with everybody else, you don't want to work with those people because they're out to get you. I don't know if there's anything else I can help you with. Chemical addiction is much more difficult. If you can devise a chemical that neutralizes the addictive chemical, you'd have to study what bad effects does it have also, the useful and the non-useful effects. Now, if the person prior to therapy is always trying to take their life with therapy, over a long period he goes blind. You have to decide whether you want them to go blind or take their life. These are decisions you make based on your background. It has to do with your background, what you will conclude.
Do you feel that today a lot of people do have addictions that they need to get away from?
Patriotism is an unhealthy addiction because it kind of shuts your mind off to other nations. I would say if children are brought up with demonstration only, it's a much better system because they can't get off what they see. It's very hard to get off what they see. Addiction is anything that you're brought up to react to strongly, whether it be drugs, habits, music, or anything. The degree is stronger with drugs. You could always put a radio down and learn new things. But with addiction, the kind of addiction that's induced by drugs seems to change your physiological response, like alcohol. Men will kill for it, or they'll put alcohol in a bottle painted white, and it's just milk on it. See, I knew people that were addicted, and what they did to conceal their addiction from their friends, or whiskey in a Coke bottle, says Coca-Cola, because they felt if people found out, other people try to take over and keep you away from liquor. If you just had a little bit of liquor, you can go on and do your work. You can go to work, but you can't if you're addicted and people take it away from you. That makes it almost impossible for you. That's why government treatment centers give you a little bit of narcotic, a little bit of tobacco, a narcotic in the tobacco to quiet your smoking. But that is one way, but it isn't a good way. I don't consider it a good way. There's a lot of work to be done in that field. Don't forget, pills are good for doctors. They give you a pill, you're not addicted to smoking, that's all you want. And the negative effects don't concern you too much. And it's good for the doctor, too. Because the guy says, I want results. I've come to you and nothing's happened. Doctor says, take this pill. Then you won't want to smoke. Drugs are immediate relief, but not in the long run. You can become addicted to pills, too. But when a doctor says you're apt to have strokes if you don't take these pills, he knows more about it than I do. But I can't doubt everybody. I have to listen to some form of statistical evidence. I also don't have as much confidence as I used to have in doctors. When I was a kid, I thought they knew everything. I don't feel that comfortable about it. Whether that's good or bad depends on the next encounter. Distract people from becoming involved in singing all day long, or dancing all day, or playing the violin all day, and their brain is filled with sound and less other information. I can't see anything in music except control of the sound, and that gives you some feeling of confidence. When you can make whatever sound you want to make, and you have that much control, you feel good. But your violin on an island, when you're hungry and you have no food, will give you nothing. So when I say it's a nothing thing, I mean in relation to survival. You can live longer playing your violin than not if you have just a bad attitude. So don't misunderstand me. Whatever addiction you have may be useful, but it's a nothing thing, like dancing. Might move you around when you tend to sit still and do nothing, so it's good compared to a person who does nothing. But when I say if you do things like grow food, bend down, water the plants, something like that, it's a something thing. It makes your flowers bloom if that's what you want.
All right, so we'll get started with questions. And like Andrew said, for this one, we'll have myself and Vixie deal with these questions.
What will be of the Venus Project after you, Jack, is not able to handle it anymore? Well, this is one of the things why we are needing to learn ourselves about the Venus Project deeply and as profoundly as we can, so that we can step in and teach everybody just as well as Jack has been teaching us. This is why so much emphasis is being put on educating ourselves. It's not going to stop when Jack's not around anymore. Sure, we're going to miss him tremendously. But, the more of us that are capable of sharing the information and carrying on, the better. So it's up to us to do that.
Yeah, and keep in mind, Roxanne will still be alive, and she's comparatively quite young. She's been working with him for 35 some odd years directly. She would be the next best thing, I suppose, as far as dealing with these types of ideas and transitions. They also have Joel and Larry living there with them and learning every day. We have Andrew, and we have, as you can see in this channel, we have us. So I think, like Vixie said, as long as we're focused on educating ourselves as best we can and each other, that should be the main focus for us right now. Because we do have to, in a sense, keep carrying these ideas on, regardless of what happens to individuals.
Absolutely, absolutely.
The main needs we need is, first of all, the education, but we need people to be able to step up and fill roles such as being able to do radio interviews, being able to do just generalized TV interviews, creating movies and media for all different types of demographics and cultures around the world, and being able to design and put up 3D designs and helping out the multiple teams that are in the Venus Project set up right now. It's essentially why you see the people who are very active with the Venus Project. It's why we're doing what we're doing. It's why I set up all the POCs across the world. In my estimation, there are millions, if not billions, of people that have this type of mindset. It's logical, it's clear, it's obvious. They just have to know that they're not alone. And that's why we create media. That's why we create presence in all different countries around the world. And that's why we try to get this general education out there. And it's all about the education and all about setting up for how we're going to work into the future.
Yes, thinking that it's going to stop when Jack isn't around anymore is a very old way of thinking.
Yeah, I struggle with I would love to be able to get anywhere close to 50% of what he was able to do throughout his life as far as doing the experiments and doing a lot of education and testing and going into different situations. But that would take me for the next 50 years of just doing nothing but that. I also have the other side of my mind that struggles with, well, we need to find ways to let other people know this basic information because they, instead of Sean, will likely be the people that carry this thing forward and take it to the next level. So I struggle going back and forth with just focusing on the study or focusing on getting others involved. And it seems to me that the getting others involved would have the higher propensity for success.
Okay, next question. In the book called Fat Man on the Left, Jack Catron states that you grew up with around 4 or 5 other intellectuals. What happened to these other men? Did they ever become aware and contribute to the Venus Project? Jack would have to ask to that himself.
I have no information on that at all, other than randomly throughout the years, people come back that had went to his 70s and 80s lectures, and that's in fact where they got this latest influx of lectures of Jacques. Was a big box full from somebody from back then.
The next question is, do you have a transitional solution for technological unemployment before a resource-based economy is attained? Have you considered the importance of getting governments on board with such a transitional idea? That again, I can't answer because I don't know if Jack's spoken about it. Do you have any ideas, Sean or Andrew?
Generally, the focus of the Venus Project is on governments or entities that have control of the resources, because that would give them the fastest transition towards actually building the first city. So our media, the lectures, everything is geared towards educating and hopefully convincing those who actually have access to these resources that are necessary to do this. As far as a transitional solution for technological unemployment, no, I don't have a direct answer for that.
Next question. What is the best way for us to arrive at decisions during the transition? For example, as we are planning ways to implement the RBE and the TVP city designs. Well, I would think that it would be the same way as everything. We'd be using a scientific method to see which would be the best way to do things, taking into account the resources in the area and the amount of population there is, and then using the scientific method to decide the best way to share them out and so on.
Well, arriving at a decision for the best way to plan to implement RBE and TVP city designs, unfortunately, it's however we gain access to the necessary resources to do so is likely how we will arrive at that decision at that time.
When the situation arises, then they'll be able to make the plans, really. But it won't be simply, oh, I think we can do this, or I think we can do that. It'll be putting it to the test and using scientific knowledge that's already proven, no?
Yeah, until you have complete access to the entire global resource system and measurement and distribution and all that, that's when you can really achieve arriving at decisions. But during the transition, it's all confusing. Does anybody else have anything to contribute to this answer? We don't have the luxury of being able to arrive at the first decision because it is the first access we will have to resources, which will be used to hopefully build the first city.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I'd add to that really is that our ability to arrive at decisions is directly relevant to or referent to the system that you're living in, the environment that you're living in. Our ability to arrive at decisions on what's the best way to manage the resources, what's the best way to distribute the resources between countries, etc., we can't do any of those things until countries decide to actually take part in those projects. So we can only arrive at decisions within the frame of reference that we've got available to us. So, things like setting up the teams, things like laying out the different projects that we've got that we do have resources for, that we have the human resources to do, those kind of things we can arrive at decisions and try out different things. What works carries on, what doesn't gets left behind, etc.
Yeah, I can use the Google moderator as a sense of that. Nobody decided to use this, we just decided to try it.
Yeah, exactly, and it's working well, so no need to change it.
However, if something else shows up that works better, which might do in a year or two, then we can always try that.
Absolutely. I mean, if someone comes along and says, hey, I've got a better idea for something to use Instead of Google Moderator, we'll give it a try. If it works better, we'll implement that. If it doesn't, then we'll carry on with Google Moderator. This comes down to the whole idea of where people say, well, to what extent do we take efficiency in the resource-based economy? Do we make everything so it's like the maximum efficiency regardless of cost and all the rest of it? Well, that's not efficient. If you're making something so that it's so efficient, but it costs you a huge amount of resources to make it that efficient, it's not really that efficient. You're wasting resources. So would we ever take, for example, an existing train system that goes around the world, would we increase it a 1% efficiency at a huge cost in resources, both human and physical resources? Well, it wouldn't be effective or efficient to actually do that. So no, there comes a point where you work with what works. If it's working and people are benefiting from the system, then you keep going with that system. You don't need to constantly upgrade things. There'd have to be a level of sense as to what is efficient.
You have often said that in the future the field of psychology will be replaced by behavioral science. Isn't this just another form of behaviorism?
What he's basically saying in there is people get confused between behaviorism and behavioral science. Behavioral science is the science of understanding behavior. It is the methodology we use to work out and determine what the causes of certain behaviors are, and then to actually work on producing an environment that shapes behaviors in a different way. So that's behavioral sciences. Behaviorism doesn't take into account the genetics of a human being that could cause propensities towards anger or could cause propensities towards depression and things like this. Behaviorism, just the same as... Sorry, I lost it there. The difference with behavioural science and behaviourism is now that we obviously realise that you can't separate the genetic side of things from the environmental side of things. The behaviour of a human being is very much made up by a mixture of the two. So that's the difference between behaviourism and behavioural science.
Well, and with this question, what Jacques really is doing with when he deals with something like psychology or behaviorism, he's doing two things. First of all, he's doing a critique of the current establishment of psychology and how the institutions teach rote learning is not effective across the board because everybody is an individual. And that huge book of whatever is wrong with people, the latest thing, restless leg syndrome, he's critiquing the whole field. And he wants it to replace it with something like a more semantically correct statement of behavioral science. Behaviorism is an ism, so he's probably critiquing that as a word. And the behavioral science is a better formulated semantic title of the field. Is that confusing at all?
No, that was great. Thank you. Is it okay to lie to people while trying to introduce TVP to them? Something like you did when you joined the Ku Klux Klan to make them listen to you by appearing to have similar values. I don't see that as lying because he didn't say anything that wasn't true. This is me answering now. This isn't necessarily Jack. If you lie to somebody, I think you lose credibility. You have to present the things to them in a way that they learn themselves. The thing that I remember about the Ku Klux Klan story is that he gave them audio to listen to, and then they themselves made their own decisions about who it was that was speaking, and their own projections made them think that it was, for example, an educated white guy, and it turned out to be a criminal or a colored guy or something. So it's not a question of lying. It's a question of presenting things in a clever way so that people are sort of hit in the face by the answer. Is that clear? Did I make that understandable? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. With Jack, he uses it, he labels it as a method, his method of getting into and being able to change values. And you can interpret that as actually lying. For some of his examples, he was misleading, but it was the only method, at least that he could perceive, of getting in there and changing their value system. And in many cases, I see that as absolutely true. When people have set value systems, how do you get around it? And he was able to find some methods that worked. and he was giving us as examples. So in a sense, yeah, it's okay.
Okay, the next question is, do you think that attaining an academic career in the social sciences and using your academic career to influence the media in promoting ideas from the Venus Project is a good route to go down in today's society? Well, I don't see why not. Absolutely, because we need the media to eventually turn around being this brainwashing machine that it is nowadays to being a positive influence and helping people to come to realize things that are happening.
I've heard him answer questions similar to this, and it was in the sense of, well, if you do have a choice about how you're going to be educated, educate yourself in something useful, and that could be very broad, but he was more pointing to sort of engineering, chemistry, these types of sciences, architectural design, these types of things that will actually help to build the first city. That's the way I heard him explain it. But in a sense, if you're not interested in these things, something like social sciences is definitely useful. I mean, we are trying to create media that is across the board, that talks to every demographic on Earth, every culture, every language. And as you can imagine, that is a huge, huge tasking. And we need people who are very strong in these areas.
Jack, how many hours do you sleep? I can't answer that one. Next question. If we're all victims of culture and the idea is to abolish culture, then what's the alternative? We're not going to abolish culture. That's not the idea. The idea is to change the culture so that we appreciate different things through the values that we learn. Culture nowadays is considered to be knowing about art, and you're standing there looking at a painting on a wall that you see as 5 or 6 blobs of color on a piece of canvas. So it's making it more relevant to what is really educational, not what is a money-making system. So we wouldn't really be victims anymore. We would be students of culture.
Well, one possible definition of culture is that it's your own personal set of indoctrinations. And yes, we do want to, in a sense, abolish that, because we want to open everybody up to other possibilities. And you don't want to be indoctrinated into your country or your village's set of values or politics or worldviews, because those can be dangerous, and trying to open up the mind to see many, many other cultures and other possibilities. And if you have a world mind, then there is no culture to you. It's just, it removes your own personal culture.
Something also to consider there is something Jack's often said, which is, if you'd like to keep your culture within a resource-based economy, consider this. I know a guy that's father was a Nazi, and his son, he still believes in some of these ideals of the Nazi party. And we've actually got a British National Party here as well that's along with very similar lines. Now, would it be okay for them to keep their culture? Would it be okay for the Muslims to keep their culture? At what point do you say, well, let's all keep our culture, then nothing would ever change? And that's the problem. Cultures tie you into a set of values that generally are anti to someone else's values, and you're always going to have conflicts with that. So yes, the idea is eventually that we will evolve out of cultures, individual nationalistic cultures, to a global culture of people moving forward, evolving and learning about what's relevant to the world that they live in and how that benefits them.
Yeah, I like Joe's description, that baggage from past generations. That seems pretty accurate.
Another question that Jack is going to have to answer. If you were in your 20s again, what would you be doing differently?
I think he answered it a couple weeks ago, didn't he?
Did he? Can you remember what he said?
I'm pretty sure he said if he could change one thing, it would be to start earlier.
Okay, next question. Why are you backing the campaign of a candidate for the US presidency, Scott Keller? Never mind his ideals. Isn't this in discordance with the objectives of the Venus Project? In actual fact, it's not the Venus Project that is backing the campaign of a presidential candidate. It's this particular presidential candidate who supports the Venus Project. And on the website, it actually says that they are supporting organizations, not the Venus Project is supporting them. So I hope that's clear.
Yeah, generally there's a million people come to email Roxanne or come to the Venus Project with their own ideas of how they want to support the Venus Project and their own values. And if they are in straight accordance with the Venus Project, what does Roxanne and Jacques do? Do they tell them to screw off? No, but they say, that's nice, do what you can, but please keep learning about the Venus Project. So they have to be a little bit nice about these types of things. But as far as this one, yeah, there is no direct support of the campaign. It's just the Scott Keller person is in support of a resource-based economy. So it's kind of the opposite direction.
If you were 20 years old today, would you change anything in your daily routine? Another question he's going to have to answer himself, unless anybody else has heard him say anything on this. Obviously not. Okay. Next question. Is there any more news on when there may be new lecture audio material from the 1970s available on your online store?
Yeah, it'd be for Roxanne and Joel to deal with. And as far as I know, what I said a couple times is that they just received a big old box of these lectures. And for the last about month or so, they've been playing these since they're of higher quality than the other lectures from the 70s and 80s. But it takes time. They just released the movie and they're dealing with things on a daily basis. So it takes time for them to transfer that into digital and then also transfer whatever. I mean, there could be hundreds of recordings and they have to choose which 10 or 16 or 20 to put on there. So it's going to take some time.
What have you learned from B.F. Skinner?
No, I couldn't answer this one directly. I've only heard him made a reference to him and how they didn't agree on a couple things, but he definitely had a visit with him and spoke to him. And I forget the details of it, so I don't want to screw it up.
Okey-doke. Next question. If free will does not exist, wouldn't that mean that we should not be held accountable for crimes? Well, if we understand what the free will thing is, that we don't really have free will as such, rather that we are conditioned by our experiences, by our education, by what we learn from our teachers at school, from what our parents show us and everything, then in a way, I suppose we aren't accountable for our crimes. However, obviously, these people can't be allowed to just walk around loose within society as it is today. They would need to be helped, and if they're really violent people, for example, then they would have to be separated from society so that they can be helped in a safe place. So to be held accountable as in saying it's your fault, you've done this, no, I would say not.
Yeah, I've got nothing to add to that, really.
Dan would like to add to that, actually. I'm seeing in the chat.
Off you go, Stan.
Thank you, guys. The question about crimes, it depends, as Jacques says, it depends on the environment and depends of how we define crimes. In a sense, I'll strongly feel that we are not responsible for what we do if we see the bigger picture. I am a graduate criminal attorney, and I completely agree with Jacques when he's saying that all the judges and all the lawyers will be criminals, considered as criminals in a new society, in a sane society, because judges cannot judge person based on just one event in their life. They have to see the movie. They have to see how his life from beginning, how a person actually get in that situation, which we consider as criminal behavior. And in that sense, nobody responsible for that. But we have to understand what is make us this way, what make other people commit, as we call, crimes. And this is very, very big issue. Another thing which Jack actually often said about it, if the guy committed the crime, steal the watch, and this is the third of his offense, and he's going in jail for 20 years, it's cheaper to give him a watch. It's cheaper to give him 5 watches than keep him a year there for $60,000, for example, give him free healthcare, give him security and stuff like that. So the crimes and health, this is not the simple issue is it can appear just judge or not judge, or somebody did something wrong. It depends on the situation, depends on the environment.
Yeah, in a small sense, I think Jacques would say yes to this question. If free will does not exist, wouldn't it mean that we should not be held accountable for our crimes? In the sense of if you're a product of your environment, then that would be a no. And so the idea is to improve the environment to a point where theoretically it can reduce 99% of crime, and hence the Venus Project.
Jack, do you see any situation in the future where a decision will be made by voting? Well, I don't know if Jack can see any. We can ask him next week when he's here, but this is something that I've heard a lot. But what sort of a decision would need to be taken by a vote? Because, for example, the typical example of the bridge being made, if it becomes evident that a bridge is needed in the city, then what is there to vote on it? You know, it will be made in the place where it's most needed, with the materials that are most adequate, and there won't really be any need to vote on it. So I haven't been able to think of any sort of a situation where a vote would be needed.
Perhaps people could vote on what the design would look like or the color, but that's about it.
The design would be designed to be the most efficient, the most effective use of the resources, to not waste resources on nonsense like the fluff that we put on buildings just to make it look pretty, to what you consider looks pretty. I personally walk around London looking at the buildings and I think they look absolutely disgusting and a horrible waste of resources. I don't even like the look of them. That's a personal thing. People are brought up with their personal ideas of what they think looks nice. What you think looks nice may look completely different to someone else. So we have to come away from these shallow, self-centered, egoistic attitudes of what looks great and how you want things to be, and all these nonsensical ideas that have no relevancy to the reality that we live in. And we'll start changing our values and behaviours to start taking into account, well, what's the best way to save resources on this project? What are the best materials to use on this project? What's the minimal design we can do to get the maximum amount of efficiency or the maximum benefit from this structure, etc., etc. They're the kind of values that we're trying to advocate in the Venus Project, and it's those values that will determine whether or not something gets built, how it gets built, what resources are used, and where those resources are distributed to.
Okay, but how about color?
This is a superficial issue. These are the kind of values that we're trying to get people to start moving away from, is these superficial values that have no bearing on the reality we live in.
Basic Economy 1.0, almost things like that won't even be like on the template. We're trying to build the resource-based economy 1.0 with the absolute minimal amount of resources and maximum amount of taking care of the humans that are on Earth right now. And extra considerations such as like a color in the first version probably won't even be on the docket.
Well, tastes in aesthetics change so much anyway. I mean, they always have done throughout the history of the world. One time fat women are in vogue, and another time miniskirts, and another time pink is the color. These are all things that are very changeable anyway. I don't think we'll hold those values in the future. The efficiency and the economy, as far as ecological economy is concerned, is what will be beautiful to us. Building that is efficient, clean, doesn't cause any side effects into the environment, that is what we will consider to be beautiful in the future. And things such as if it's pink or green or furry, as Andrew said, that just won't even enter into our heads.
Well, color might be not an issue. I think the question was asked a couple of times why designs for the buildings are white. And I remember Jacques responded that because this was designed for the tropical area, but for example, in the north, it can be different colors, so it can absorb the heat. Or actually, in the buildings, they can change colors. It depends on their time of the year, so it can be more efficient.
Yeah, and they can be photovoltaic cells, they're called, to generate their own energy and so on. So, this kind of thing would be involved with the choosing of the color, but not for aesthetical effects because somebody likes this or that better than another color. Okay, how can we introduce TVP concepts best in a university? Principals, scholars? In other words, who are the best people to go to in the university, the teachers or the students? I guess it depends on who you have as a contact in the university. If you know somebody who's a principal there, well then talk to them. If you know somebody that's a student who has a contact, a good relationship with a scholar, then go through them. And then, depending on the age group, depending on the subject that they're studying, focus the talk and the concepts on that. For example, if you're going to give a talk to architects, then focus on what we've just been talking about now, about the logic behind the designs, the sustainability and so on, and using the best materials in the most efficient way and so on. If it's a group of gardeners, then talk about ecological farming and vertical farming and things like this. Go to what they can relate to.
Just doing a presentation or a lecture at a college itself should cover both of those, because the students will obviously show up, and then sometimes the professors show up also. So that should cover that, and then you can move on from there.
If a sustainability project needs to be built to increase productivity in a resource-based economy, but would diminish the quality of life 25% of the population due to lack of resources, by what formula would it be determined who the unfortunate 25% are?
This will take me a couple minutes.
Yeah.
But I have put in some. This is a really complex question, and there are some simple answers to it, but you have to have already studied some other things. But essentially, you you determine the carrying capacity of Earth based on a standard of living. And there is an equation you can have for this. And this is how much arable land, fresh water, and air supply with education and shelter. Based on currently 7 billion people, I estimate that the Earth itself, at a decent standard of living, at a really good standard of living, much higher than we live now, the Earth can hold hundreds of billions if we're smart about it. But until we have control over that system, we're stuck. But in a sense, you will see these types of stats projected. You will see if the Earth will have stats. The Earth can sustain 100 billion people. As we are approaching 50 billion people on Earth, I'm sorry, am I wrong with billion? It's probably trillion. As we're approaching 50, then everybody on Earth will realize this, and then as soon as we exceed the 100, our standard of living will go down. I think, actually, that people will make decisions to have less children in this case, because they would want to maintain that standard of living. And we would create a buffer zone for ourselves where this 25% index would not actually occur, or we'd have enough extra resources to be able to take care of something like this without diminishing the quality of life.
Yeah, I can't really see it happening that, because it would mean that we weren't taking care of the education for the people in regards to birth control, People would be producing like rabbits again if we got to that stage.
It's a billion, so 7 billion people on Earth. I'd like to create a model to demonstrate that the Earth can actually sustain much more. There's all kinds of different statistics and numbers that go into the equation, but I think that we would be smart enough when everybody on Earth that has a decent level of education and everybody on Earth has access to all information at all times, we can forecast and see these things coming, and then make better decisions about our lifestyles, whether or not to have more children or not, whether or not to maintain an equilibrium of 50 billion people on Earth so we can maintain this standard of living. And until we populate another planet, we should probably maintain around 50 billion. And this would change people's decision making. Some couples, instead of having 3 children, would have 2, which would be a sustainable thing. Or some would have 3 and some would have 1. So I think all this stuff works itself out if everybody has a decent level of education and if everybody has access to all information.
Next one. Religion tells us that one of Adam's sons killed his brother out of jealousy when they had all the world for themselves, which destroys your idea about human nature to religious people, which makes them don't listen to us. How would you reply to that? That is very complicated, because that shows a level of conditioning that I think would need to be come at from another way.
Well, sometimes maybe it makes sense to point out on all the stuff in the Bible. It says, for example, the woman should be submissive to a man and should be silent and obedient. And when you speak with people in that term, it says, look, it's in the Bible. Do you agree with that? And you can start build understanding of what they're actually reading from this.
Well, I think that we all have our strengths and weaknesses, and I think that there are people that are stronger in answering these types of questions, and that there are teams that need to be formed to develop methodologies of answering these type of questions, so that the person they're talking to isn't just completely rejected by your answers. Me as a technical person probably shouldn't be answering this type of question because this stuff tends to frustrate me, and so I would not be like the ideal person to answer this type of question. But there are people who are much stronger in these areas, so those are the people we can have develop these types of FAQs and these types of media. So that'd be the most intelligent method to go about it.
Yeah, I think I'd probably end up getting into a long conversation on it. But anyway, next question. Do you think human society will evolve into something similar to TVP, but not exactly as you intended it? Similar meaning not all aspects, but some aspects. If not, we are doomed? Well, that's asking for personal opinion from Jack, I guess, or from many of us. And I would repeat what we said before. We can't foretell the future.
I kind of disagree in that, in the sense that we can project forward based on current events and previous events to get an idea of sort of where we're going. I would say that if you look at the way capitalism has formed, if you look at the way the socio-economic systems of the world have been forming over the last 100 or so years, I would say that we're not moving towards a resource-based economy naturally. I think if anything, we're sort of going to be heading far more towards totalitarianism, where governments will push harder and harder and harder to keep their hand on things, to keep things the way they are, to manipulate the system to benefit them the most. This is why education is such a big thing within the Venus Project, is to educate everybody, no matter where you are in your status as far as the socio-economic system is concerned. Whether you're an elitist, whether you're a banker, whether you're a policeman, whether you're a baker or whatever. Everybody needs educating to what's relevant in this world and what can actually benefit people the most. And that's really what we're trying to head for. So, no, I personally don't think that we're heading towards a resource-based economy. I'd say that all the evidence in the world, around the world, and the way that socio-economic systems are going indicates that very well, that that's not the direction we're naturally headed in.
I think a little bit more optimistically about it, although it might not sound like it. To quickly answer this question, I think the answer is yes. TVP is not mandates. You don't have to have absolute cities that look like this. It just seems that these are some of the most efficient methodologies to go about it. And it seems that a person who thinks along this mindset will arrive at the same type of design, same type of efficiencies, same working in conjunction with the resources on Earth. But generally, I made up a statement a while back, and I think two things are inevitable. Resource-based economy is inevitable. It will happen and the other thing that's inevitable is human self-destruction. So if we keep on the trends we are today, I think we'll find a way to really mess ourselves up to where we can't even live on this earth. But the other inevitability is a resource-based economy, and that's what we're here to do, is to try to make the resource-based economy outpace our self-destruction.
Yes, it's up to us to get the word out, isn't it? In time.
As Jack says, if you do nothing, nothing will happen. So if you want to live in a resource-based economy, it really is down to every one of us to make that happen, and to get everyone that we can on board with these ideas, educated to these ideas, and to spread these ideas around the world. Then you've got a good chance of seeing it happen. That's the only real chance we've got.
Well, in a sense, most of us, even here, are conditioned to sit around and wait for another to do something. And that is what will lead to our destruction. We all have to step up. We all have to find our niche. We all have to do something. Otherwise, like Jacques says, nothing will happen. You have to take yourself out of your comfort zone because you've been conditioned to wait for somebody else to do it for you, and you can't.
Exactly. Another quote from Jacques, or maybe from somebody else that he got it from. Nothing itself is self-activating, and everything is acted upon by resident forces. And the same way that we are acted upon by all our environment and everything that we learned, we ourselves are environment for others. So we can shape directly if once we've got this small edge from the sticker we want to pull from the system, which Jack did for us. He scratched his nail off, his fingernails off up to the shoulder, I think, by finding that edge on the sticker to pull it off. So we are the ones now that can do the rest of the work and move it forward. And nothing itself is self-activating, so we have to put work into it. Like all other before me said, if we don't do nothing, nothing will happen.
That's a great image there, scratching your nail and lifting up the edge of the sticker. That's a really good image. Somebody could run with that and make a poster for the Venus Project.
Yeah, maybe.
Okay, Jack, what do you think about the statement, we must become the change we want to see in the world? Well, again, I can't speak for Jack. I don't suppose any of us can, but I think it's very true. But at the same time, I don't think we should be too introspective in the way that some people are when they go off on this spirituality kick, because it becomes then an ego thing. But yes, we obviously have to work on ourselves if we want to change the world.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep, I agree. You do both. You do too much introspective and no actions at all. And yeah, you feel great, but the world as a whole is not improved.
Exactly. Addiction. Wouldn't a rehabilitation clinic be a good idea to disseminate TVP's way of thinking? The good results with people could make this system even more well known. Does that mean to go into a rehabilitation clinic and get people there to turn around to the Venus Project's way of thinking? Is that what the question means?
No, by rehabilitating real drug addicts.
Ah, right. Well, Jack already did this. He did already help a lot of people overcome addictions, and they still, from what I understand, they still keep in touch with him nowadays, occasionally calling to see how he is and so on, and they now help other people get unaddicted, unhooked from drugs. So, yeah, why not? But I don't know if it would be necessarily any more plan to go with than any of the other plans that we've got. But it could be interesting. Why not?
Specifically considering, like, is this a good demographic to go after? Like a low-hanging fruit, which people have talked about. These people might be more open to these ideas, especially if you cure them of their addiction. If that's your focus and your aim, then that's probably a decent thing to do. But generally, I think there are probably more global efforts that could be done with your energies.
I think that's more meant into a way like it could be advertisement for the Venus Project if we have like facilities, and I think maybe also other ways are meant by this, not only like working with addicts, maybe other areas that we could reach into that just run good and we have good outputs of that and people are confident with our work, and so this would be a good advertisement for the Venus Project. Is that correct? So if so, I think there are many ways that the Venus Project could do things to show people that our system works. This could be understood as kind of an experiment that we do in our behavioral sciences and stuff. But I think this is only an option if we have like an overflow of resources and financing for that and stuff. I think before this point, when we have people waiting in line, so to speak, that raise their hands and say, we want to work for the Venus Project, but we don't have things to give to them. I think then things would be an option. But before that, we should focus every means of financing or resources that we have to the main goals that we have, so they can be reached. And after that, I think these optional features could be arrived at.
Maybe the biggest issue with TVP is to get many people educated in one direction. Isn't that too circular? The need of having educated people to get to a world where people act the best way possible? Well, if it's... No. We need to have educated people to get to a world people act the best way possible. I don't see any other direction that we could be going in.
Yeah, since we do not have access to the resources to literally build a city and build this resource-based economy around the world so people can touch it, we need people that are able to think in the abstract. And to be able to think in the abstract accurately, you do have to have a certain level of education, i.e. the tools to be able to do so. So yes, it takes the education to do so. I mean, with this question, imagine the opposite. Is it in any way possible to get towards a resource-based economy without education? And the answer to that is obviously no.
Something else to consider with that is that we're trying to sell a product essentially to the world, that product being a resource-based economy. In order to want a resource-based economy, you have to first of all understand what it is and how it would benefit you, and that requires education. And it requires a change in values from the existing cultural values that most people share around the world of consumerism and capitalism and social Darwinistic systems that are prevalent all around the world. You're trying to sell something to a different value system, and they won't bite. This is why we have so much trouble getting through to people, because you're dealing with a different set of values, and we're trying to educate people out of those values and into a more rewarding set of values that will benefit them. And that takes time, you know. It took time for every single one of us here to get to where we are now with our understanding of the Venus Project and the various fields that are interrelated with that, from behaviourism through to the technological side of things, through to the social side of things, the political side of things, etc., etc. This is a long process, you all well know, you know, from your own education in this area. So, yeah, you know, until we can get through to enough people and sell this idea to them in a way that they can understand it and feel that it will benefit them, that's really where we need to be putting our efforts.
Next question. How can someone work directly at the Venus Florida complex?
At this time, they don't have the resources to be able to take on anybody else. The place can hold 4 people. Even though it has 10 buildings, it only has the sewage and the resources to really deal with 4 people, and they have 4 people right now. So at this point, there is no way to do so, to work directly at the Venus Florida complex. Roxanne will point you to coming to their tour, which is basically every Saturday, and you can email admin@thevenusproject.com to set all that up. And she will also point you to the website and getting involved in the project team, be it in the core design or support area, POC of your area. So all this online stuff, really where she'll point you to. But if you disagree with that in any way, I'd invite you just to email admin@thevenusproject.com with this question, or re-ask it at another time when they are here.
Jack, what chemical products do you use for washing clothes, washing your face, hair, etc.? I've no idea. Does anybody else
I think
know?
it's just, I didn't see anything out of the normal there, just regular soap. He doesn't do anything extreme as far as his living, as far as eating and washing. It's more just normal stuff, normal soap, just everything looked normal to me.
And apple pie.
Apple
And
pie.
what?
Yeah, Jack's favourite, apple pie.
All right. Next question. There isn't enough time to approve ECO SOC consultative status for Rio 20 conference. So can we ask any of accredited organizations, and there's a link, to send Jack as their representative to hold the speech at Rio 20? That would be something that Jack and Roxanne would have to answer now.
Yes, as far as I was aware, the last time we heard this was last week, and Jack and Roxanne asked them to email them directly about this because they wanted to speak to them about this whole UN thing.
Okay. Next question. What do you mean by turning around? What Jack means by turning around is when he helps somebody to see things from a different angle, basically changing their values, helping them to see the way that they're thinking is the way that is not helpful and to the world, and turning their thoughts around to becoming a more relevant way of thinking with different values.
Yeah, that's all I got from him, like changing somebody from their very dogmatic types of thinking about KKK, from thinking that anybody other than a white race is bad. And if Jacques goes in there and is able to turn them around in a sense and get them thinking a more broader spectrum, then that is a positive thing.
When everything is provided for you in TVP, what would be the point of getting an education? Well, there would still be a need for education, obviously. We can't carry on looking after the world if we don't understand how it works. We can't carry on getting along with each other if we're not educated. So we definitely need education. Everything is provided for us in the sense of goods and services, but we will still need to give to society through our knowledge. So if we have no knowledge, we can't help society. So basically, we're going to need an education to be able to carry on helping society.
It's a question that's about incentive, and there's many videos on this, many studies on this, And most of them prove the incentive is not based on monetary gain or gaining many things. I'll provide a couple of links in here. I have almost fully worked out answer to this, but I'll give you an example. In a place like even America, which is inundated daily, with you must do this, you have to do this, we're brainwashed into needing all kinds of things through the media. People still have incentive to volunteer. There's something like 27% of the population finds time to volunteer their time. So, and that's what kind of incentive is that? So, let alone educating yourself for mastery being one of the absolute, I think that's the top incentivizer for people is mastery of their profession. So, I think there's so many things that people can go through.
Okay, what about the muffins? Yeah, there will be free muffins as well. Muffins, cookies, apple pie.
Is that a question for the recipe again? Because I think they answered it last week.
Okay. Should drugs be legalized to eradicate addiction? I don't know whether legalizing drugs will do anything other than take away the monetary incentive. What would eradicate addiction is education, which is, the wonderful recording that we listened to before the question and answer session. What is the addiction is the scarcity, the monetary system, but legalizing it, I don't know. I really don't see that it would help.
Yeah, I would like to jump in on that. The thing is, if you legalize, it depends of the countries, of course, but the countries which legalize drugs partially right now, they're doing a lot better in terms of addiction of their percentage of the drug addiction in of their population. You can check the Netherlands, and you will find all information about it on the web. And you always see if you criminalize something like it was with bootlegs in the 30s in America. If you try to suppress that, people just go on the ground and do their own thing. But as far as I understand, and please correct me if I'm wrong, in the Venus Project, how Jacques explained it, that in the sane society we will not use drugs. We're not going to have any means to use it, because when you use drugs, you try to get away from the reality. And what the Venus Project proposed, the reality would be a lot better than we have right now, which give us a lot more opportunities and a lot more ways to participate in the reality and advance ourselves. So we're not gonna have any means to numb ourselves, for that matter.
I think there's also a big difference in the timeline that we can view in this direction, and many directions that we talk about. It's a big difference if we talk about the transitional phase of the RBE, or if we talk about like a more advanced RBE, maybe even global already 2 or 3 generations into a global RBE. There will be a considerable difference in the way that people view their recreational usage of drugs, maybe, or whatever they want to do with it. And yeah, please keep that in mind also. There's a difference between a first stage of this RBE compared to a very advanced stage more into the future. So as an example, what I mean by this, right now there might still be people who want to use certain things as just a recreational aspect of their lives. So just to keep it away from them might not be like Stan stated, if people want to use something, they will find a way to use it. So education is the best way. More into the future, people will not even think about creating these substances that are used for it. But as they still exist, and as most people are not that much educated, they might be still around because people actually want it. And they should be educated about the usage that is not harmful to them, or how they can decrease harmfulness to them.
Next question, I think, has a very large and wide answer to it, which could take an awful long time to go through. But anyway, how to explain what TVP is to ignorant people? First of all, ignorant people are people that have not received certain information and are conditioned. If they're ignorant because they haven't got knowledge, then it's lack of education. If you're considering ignorance as being, for example, rude or impolite, then that is a result of their consequence of their education and their environment. I think each case would have to be treated as it is. Try and get on some topic with them that resonates with them, whether it's the fact that they don't like the food in the supermarket, whether it's the fact that they've got no money, and try and explain without necessarily starting the conversation about TVP, but simply slowly planting seeds to make them realize what's wrong with the world, and then pointing out solutions. But you have to do it very carefully, and I think you'd have to do it with each person as they come to you.
Well, considering we're not like, most of us are not experts in these areas, we're not as effective as most people would be. Utilize the material that the Venus Project makes. For example, the latest one, use the movie Paradise or Oblivion. And if unfortunately it is not translated into your language, then assist the team in translating it into your language so you can then present it to those people. Because I would estimate that most of us here, especially even across the world, are not strong in addressing people yet. But we could work on it. But until that point, use TVP material that's already been made for you.
Thanks for the plug for the linguistic team there, Sean. Okay, moving on. What do you think about the elections in Greece and France? Well, what do we think about any elections? We know that it's not going to make any difference. It's the same, right or left, central or whatever. They're all pulled behind them by the banks and the corporations, so it doesn't matter who gets in. People aren't going to be any happier. The only positive thing I can think about it is that it's just going to help people to lose more and more faith in the system and realize that they have to look for other solutions.
Right. In the short term, it might be a slight improvement in people's perception, but in long term, it'll be a repeat of the same exact mistakes. Whether it takes 10 years, 50 years, or 100 years, they'll still repeat. If they're still using the same value system, things like capitalism, ownership, the opposite of a resource-based economy, then the same mistakes will occur. And that's another thing we're here to do, is to put that other option in people's minds. As systems collapse, when and if they do, a person needs to have the opportunity, just the opportunity to make that choice. Right now, people in general do not have that opportunity. They only have one choice to make, and that is to return to the same thing of capitalism. If we do nothing more than just give them another choice, so they have two things to choose from, I think we've done a really good job.
Last question on the list. Jack, sorry to bring this up. Is there someone or a group of people that have access to your creative ideas and thoughts when you are no longer with us? Computer files, blueprints, so on. I understand your need to keep some ideas private.
Yes, Roxanne has access to everything that Jacques worked on all his life. She'll continue to run the project once he's gone.
When I was 5, I started to learn a Chinese game called Go Game. What it does has allowed me to foresee 10 steps in 10 different directions, back and forth, connecting dots, and reorganization of patterns in game, in life, in people organization. I have seen Venus video from Jack talking about problem solver. I am still observing what Venus Project is, and I like to know, beside arguing, all what people can do and don't do. What is getting ready for the new system to take over of the old system? Okay, I think this person is very, very new to the Venus Project, and the best thing that could be done would be for him to look at the website and to study that, because there is a tremendous amount of information on the web. So once he's read all that and then looked at the activism teams as well, then he can perhaps see where he can fit in and help the ones that are in the teams. I hope that's answered the question. And then I have another question here. The one that says, I have a question. Will you advise to build a miniature TVP if I have the resources ready, maybe a village size with schooling, hospitals, etc.? TVP does want to, Venus Project does want to build not a miniature TVP. They want to build a whole city, an experimental research city where they can show all the wonderful things that we could have if technology was free for the world. They can invite people from all over the world, just ordinary people and leaders of different countries and so on, so they can come along and see just exactly what we could have if technology was freed up, and see the future as it could be. So it wouldn't be a village size, it would be a city. It would be a sort of a university city where people would be learning as well, and they would be designing the next city based on what they discover in the first one, anything that can be improved and so on and so forth. Always using the best that they can with the technology available at the time.
Yeah, if you have
sorry.
access to resources and things of that sort, then definitely get in contact. Email admin@thevenusproject.com and get an email contact or re-ask that question next week.
There's something I wanted to add on to there. There's a critical thing for everybody here to understand, and that is that there is no such thing as a low-tech resource-based economy. That's not what a resource-based economy is. We could not do a resource-based economy as designed by Jacques Fresco over the last 50 years in a low-tech solution. You could not have what is called now this eco-village construction set. That's not a resource-based economy. So in order to do a resource-based economy in small scale, such as, for example, a village size, as you said, or whatever it was, it's got to be high-tech. We're talking about high-tech, high automation to be able to provide for the needs of people at a much higher rate than we're able to do it currently. So the resources to do such a city or such a eighth of a city or such a community would be much higher than that of something so low tech.
When you're teaching these resource-based economy, a resource-based economy by definition is global. You stick with that, then you're good to go. But also taking into consideration, we don't have access to the world's resources, so we do have to focus on what we can attain as far as resources go at this point, and then make decisions based upon that. But when you're teaching generally, just remember, a resource-based economy by definition is global.
I think we've answered all the questions, except the ones that we had to leave for Jack, which weren't so many in the end.
Yeah, apparently their internet did not come back up, so please come back next week, re-ask them, and we'll have the same thing over again.
Yes, thanks to everybody for being here. And we look forward to seeing you next week on May the 13th, 2012. Bye to everybody and hugs.